Delaware Tech, Chemistry 100, Chemistry 110, Virtual Laboratory number 11, Organic Chemistry. In this lab, you were first asked to open up a short video on how to construct physical models using molecular model kits that you might buy. In this video, we're going to go over how to use a molecular model program. So in this program called Models 360, this one is presented by ChemEDDL, the Chemical Education Digital Library. And what's nice about this is you can pick any number of different molecules, organic molecules as well as non-organic molecules, inorganic molecules, and look at the structures and look at different aspects of the structure. So when you come on, you'll see that it defaults to methane. Methane has a formula of CH4, so it's one carbon. Technically, it's not an organic molecule, but it's typically considered an organic molecule because it behaves like many other organic molecules that contain multiple carbons. But what you'll see here is at the top it says find, and if you want to look for a new molecule, and if you know the name, you could type it in, acetone for instance, and you can search here and click it, and you will get the structure for acetone coming up. And you can see that this molecule has 1, 2, 3 carbons. The carbons are in gray, the oxygens are in white, and in almost every molecular model kit or program, oxygens are red, nitrogens are blue, and then various other elements might be other colors. Typically, carbon and hydrogen are some combination of white, blue, and black, depending on the model kit or the program you're working with. Now you'll notice in this program, if you take your cursor, you can actually physically rotate the model any way you want. You can rotate it like this, or you can just click the spin button and let the program do it for you. And you can take a look at this. Now, you'll notice, I'm going to stop the spin by unclicking that, and if you look at the structure, it has 1, 2, 3 carbons. The carbons on either end each have 3 hydrogens in white, and then there's a central carbon which has a double bond with these 2 lines to an oxygen. And this is how you might think of it when you're drawing the molecule. This is how you might draw it, though you would substitute letters instead of the balls when you're writing the chemical structure. But if you want to see what this molecule really looks like, or at least closer to what it really looks like, forgetting the color, of course, you would click the VDW radii button. This stands for van der Waals radii. Van der Waals was a brilliant chemical physicist who was interested in interactions of different types of molecules. And one of the things that he investigated was essentially how big these molecules are. Now this model, this picture that you see right here, is referred to as a ball and stick model because it looks like it's composed of balls connected with sticks, just like any molecular model kit that you might purchase. But the reality is, while we show single bonds as single little rods here and double bonds as double rods, the reality, when I click this button, you'll see is very different. That's what the actual molecule looks like, at least in terms of its overall shape. And you'll see, number 1, it's much fatter. And number 2, you can't see the individual bonds. You just see atoms squished up against other atoms. And this is actually more realistic. So it gives you an idea of how the molecule actually fills the space. And in fact, these are also frequently referred to as space-filling models. They're also called CPK models, but space-filling, you can see why it's called that. I'm going to unclick it so we can actually see the bonds here. If you want to see how long the bonds are, you can click bond length, and these are in nanometers. You'll notice all of the bonds tend to be in the ballpark of 0.1 to 0.2 nanometers. The longer the bond, the weaker the bond, the shorter the bond, the stronger the bonds. Double bonds are stronger, so they tend to be shorter. As you can see, this double bond is 0.122 nanometers, whereas the single bonds are slightly longer, though some of the single bonds between carbon and hydrogen are fairly short as well. If you want to look at bond angles, you can click on this, and it will show you the various angles between groups of atoms. If you look at any group of three connected atoms, you can see the angle between them. Atom labels, in case you forget the color coding system, you can see oxygen is always red. Carbons and hydrogens are, in this particular case, are gray and white respectively. And like I said, nitrogens are blue. We can take this off. We can go to labels off. If we want to look at the partial charges, remember, these are molecules with covalent bonds, and while they have no full charges, there are partial charges because there is polarity within the bond. If you want to see that polarity, you can click the partial charges button, and you can see some numbers are positive and some numbers are negative. If we look at the carbonyl function, the C double bond oxygen, we see the carbon is about 0.58 and the oxygen is negative 0.54. So this represents a dipole. If we want to see the individual dipole, we can take the labels off and we can click bond dipoles, and now we can see the dipoles for every bond. And the longer lines, the longer arrows represent bigger dipoles. Shorter lines, though these don't look that short, these are actually considered very short in this particular model. These are very nonpolar. They're very short arrows. Whereas the carbonyl, the C double bond O, is a very polar bond. You can see that. Now, if you want to take that off, you can look at the overall dipole. So this is the combined dipole of all the dipoles on the molecule. And you'll see it really focuses around the carbonyl because the others more or less cancel each other out, these small other dipoles. Whereas there's nothing to cancel out this carbonyl right in the center here. It has a strong dipole, and that's essentially the same as the molecular dipole in this case. Now, you can look at these others for your own benefit. I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on it, but what you should mostly understand is what type of molecule you're looking at. And acetone, being that has a carbonyl, a C double bond oxygen, and that carbonyl is flanked by a carbon here, in fact it's a methyl group, and another carbon, again another methyl group. So carbonyls that have a carbon on either side of them are called ketones. So you would first note that acetone is a ketone, that you can say that it's composed of 3 carbons, and the central carbon is in a carbonyl group, though this is not one of your functional groups, it's part of a number of different functional groups. Carbonyls are found in aldehydes and ketones, esters, carboxylic acids, and a number of other functional groups that you either learn about in class or might learn about if you take organic chemistry. And you'll see there's a methyl group here and another methyl group here. So you can mention these. You can mention that there's a big molecular dipole, which means that the molecule is polar and therefore probably pretty soluble in water. And if you've ever worked with acetone, you would find acetone in mixtures like nail polish remover, and nail polish remover will mix with water. Acetone is very soluble in water. So these are the kinds of things you would look at. And if you don't know the names of compounds, literally type in any letter of the alphabet. Here's O. And you'll see I'll get a number of different molecules coming up. Some of them don't have carbons, so you're not going to use those. But a lot of them do have carbons. And so select one. Here's one, 2-methyl-propan-2-ol. So even if you don't know the names of the molecules, and I can just grab this and rotate it the way I want, here's a molecule. You can see this molecule. I'm rotating it so you can see all the carbons. It has a central carbon with an OH group. That means it's an alcohol. And that central alcohol group on that central carbon also has 3 other methyl groups on it, 3 other carbons. So you can say that this is an alcohol. If we look at the molecular dipole, it's not quite as big as before. And that's because it's swamped out by all these other dipoles. So while this molecule is somewhat polar, it's not incredibly polar. But you can say that it's partially polar. That's perfectly fine. If you want to spin it and take a look at it, you can do that. If you want to look at the van der Waals radius, you can see these molecules tend to be flat, blobby-looking objects when you actually look at the shape, and you don't really see the bonds anymore. So while it's fun to look at that way, it's a lot easier to look at it in the ball and stick model. So just play around with it. Take note of the kind of molecule it is. Make sure you spell the name right, and point out things that you might find in the structure. Basically have fun with this program because there's a lot of interesting stuff you can do with it. And with that, we'll stop